I claimed I was loyal, but I've been secretly meeting my ex at a private lake house in the woods, and there's no elegant way to say that except out loud with my whole mouth. I'm Rhea, I'm 34, and I'm an air traffic controller who spends 12-hour shifts separating metal and weather with my voice while the rest of my life keeps drifting into the uncontrolled airspace I tell everyone I'd never wander into. On frequency I am clipped, kind, ruthless when needed. Qantas 312 descend 4000, reduce speed 210, maintain separation, contact tower 118.7. That kind of sentence keeps hundreds of strangers from touching each other the wrong way. In my personal life, I tell myself I do the same: deconflict, distress, de-escalate. My husband, Jonah, is a data scientist who talks about signals and noise, and on Fridays, brings home those chocolate-covered almonds that pretend to be health food because they once saw a cacao tree in a documentary. He is thoughtful in the big ways and occasionally terrible in the small ones, like he doesn't see the point of lids on spices. We are a domesticist couple. We speak the language fluently and still mispronounce the important words. The lake house is not ours. It belongs to a woman named Marina who is exactly as inevitable as her name, a documentary editor who lives in a blue city somewhere else and lets friends of friends borrow the house because she believes places should have practice being loved. If you don't know where to turn, you miss the driveway. The track is half gravel, half stubborn root, and at the end the house sits like a secret. Sharp-angled roof, deck that remembers bare feet, 2 rooms and a loft, windows that barter with trees. The lake itself is a patient oval, dark unless it's feeling generous. Loons pull punctuation across it at dusk. There's a galvanized tub outside that collects rain and moths and the occasional wish. When I first saw it years ago, Lucas laughed at my face and said, "Careful, your city's showing." Lucas is the ex, obviously. He's 36, a physics teacher who can balance a broom on its bristles and you'll panic in the same hour. He used to busk with a violin at the farmer's market, but only the minor key songs because he thought joy should have dirt under its nails. We met in a climbing gym. He fell off a problem and grinned like gravity was a flirtation. We lived on bowls of noodles and the kind of honesty you share at 2 a.m. because you think Dawn will applaud. We broke because he wanted to live in a cabin and I wanted a life where the electricity didn't feel threatened by our ideas. He moved toward trees. I moved toward towers. It was clean, which is to say it didn't break loudly enough to warn me we'd still be splintering years later. He texted me last winter at 4:12 a.m., which is the hour I listened to the night trying to become morning on the drive home. "Do you still count lightning like it owes you money?" it said. I stared at the screen while red tail lights ribboned down the freeway and answered the way people answer when they are pretending they didn't save the number, only when I want to know whether thunder is lying. He sent a photo of a lake with thin ice and a dock that believed in summer. "Marina is away," he wrote. "The radiator hisses like a cat that forgives you anyway." I told myself I'd just ask about the heron that stalks the reeds like it owns debt. My thumbs had other plans. The first time I went again, I lied with a tone reserved for pilots who claim they're established on the localizer but are wandering like sheep. I told Jonah I'd swapped into a double because a colleague's kid had a fever, which is almost always true for someone in our roster, so it smelled like plausible deniability. I packed a small bag with big intentions, a book I wouldn't read, a sweater that forgives arms, the good toothpaste I pretend is a personality trait. I drove with the radio off, counting mile markers like rosary beads. The driveway remembered me, which felt both rude and correct. The house unlocked in that way certain places do when you walk like you belong there even if you shouldn't. Lucas looked older in the ways the world respects, lines that come from laughing and squinting at sky, not from scowling at screens. He had a scar on his wrist I didn't know. It caught the light and turned into the past tense. He made tea because he always made tea, and he brewed it the way a careful person performs a ritual they don't want the gods to catch them rushing. We stood by the window, 2 people who know each other's sleep tics and the names of each other's childhood dogs, and we said nothing important for 10 minutes. Then he said, "I have missed the way you tap your fingernails when you're pretending to be patient," and I said, "I have missed being the person who gets teased for that," and we were already halfway down the stairs to the lake without moving. We didn't touch. Not the first day. There are other ways to cheat. I helped him split wood and pretended every swing was about muscles, not metaphors. We oiled the deck with long, slow strokes that looked like the kind of disciplined, yearning middle-aged poets get paid to put in slender books. We ate soup he'd made that tasted like decisions. The radiator hissed. The loons wrote the evening down without asking our permission. At midnight we stood on the dock and listened to the ice talk. It makes a sound like a whale telling a secret. I watched our breath and told myself breath is not a contract. Back in the city, Jonah noticed I smelled like cedar. "You're a whole cabin," he said, pressing his nose to my hair as if the scent could confess. I mumbled something about the new flight strip of tree planting along the airport's perimeter. I am a professional liar when the lie keeps metal safe. In love, I am an amateur, which makes it more dangerous. When he fell asleep that night, I watched the ceiling slant toward the corner where the paint never quite meets, and I practiced the thing I should have said. I pictured him at the dining table running statistical models that tell the future how to behave, and I imagined inserting myself as an outlier. I couldn't find the axis label that would make me make sense. There's a thing about being an air traffic controller, your attention becomes territorial. You protect it like a lake protects fog. The screen lights up with blips that are big lives distilled into tiny, blinking demands. You sequence them like prayers. Your voice becomes an instrument of weather. Descend. Turn. Hold. After 12 hours of being a god of tiny skies, you come home and want to be small. I wanted to hand the bigness of me to someone who remembered how to hold it. It's not a justification, it's a map I kept refusing to label. The second trip to the lake house we broke the other rule. "This is nothing," we lied together, and then did something with our mouths that was definitely not nothing. It felt like a room I used to rent for cheap without a lease. It felt like a relief that should come with paperwork. After, he said, "What are we doing?" like a responsible adult, and I said, "Meteorology," because I didn't want to say, "We are building a weather system that will eventually ruin a small town." We became a weekend. Not every weekend, our lives still believed in routines, but often enough my car could have driven itself by smell. I told myself a collection of self-soothing narratives. He needed someone to help with repairs. The pipes sulked. The loft ladder squeaked like a mouse with opinions. The stove taught patience. We read novels out loud like old men. We took swims so cold they turned my language into a fist. We made rules to keep dignity from breaking a leg. No photos, no joking about leaving our toothbrushes, no asking where the other sleeps on the nights we don't meet. The human brain loves rules almost as much as it loves breaking them. We broke the one about toothbrushes. Mine was green. He called it signal. I pretended not to feel anything when he said the word. My best friend Sal noticed before anyone because she is a paramedic and can read pulse from a joke. We were at the market where tomatoes shout in red and she said, "You are walking like your spine learned a new hymn." I said, "I started Pilates," which is both true. I did 2 classes and then ghosted, and cowardly. She tipped her sunglasses down her nose and said, "When you feel like confessing, I've replaced my spare room's light bulb, which is Sal for you're safe." I didn't confess. I bought 6 peaches like I could purchase absolution by the kilogram. The near quarts were small, cruel domestic things. A smear of sap on my forearm in a shape that looked like the letter L if you were unkind. A leaf in the lining of my coat I pretended was from the plane tree on our street. A message from Marina, "Bring in the hammock if it rains X," that popped up on my lock screen while Jonah was setting a timer for the rice. He glanced and did not ask, which is a type of mercy you pay interest on forever. Once the loons called in my sleep and I said shush to the dark the way I say it on frequency when a pilot tries to talk over emergency traffic. Jonah rolled toward me and held me like he wanted to be the silence I was asking for. What I liked at the lake was not just Lucas. It was my other self, the one who said later to her own competence. I didn't futz with towels. I let sand live on the floor overnight. I ate like appetite was allowed to write the menu. We played a game called One Honest Thing, where the rule was to say any truth that would be silly to bring up in the city. He said, "I wish I'd learned to bake bread that doesn't behave like a cliff." I said, "Sometimes I count the planes louder than the prayers because I don't know which works." He said, when you leave your cup on the deck rail, the ring it makes looks like a tiny eclipse, and I had to lie down on the boards with my arm over my eyes like a dramatic auntie, because the sentence was so specifically about me I wanted to both applaud and run. I am not unaware of the privilege in my mess. Some people's problems are unheated apartments and too many jobs. Mine was a surplus of tenderness misallocated like a budget with nice graphs. That's why I became a magician with justifications. I told myself that my marriage had become a checklist and marriage cannot survive on aviation-grade checklists alone. I told myself that a lake house was safer than a hotel because hotels smell like decisions while cabins smell like wood and wood has no opinion about oaths. I told myself that the human heart is an airspace and there's room for holding patterns while the runway clears. The worst lie was the one where I promised I'd end it when things stabilized, as if love obeys traffic flow. Then the bushfire season leaned in because the world likes to add its own plot. Smoke turned our city into an old photograph. At work, planes lined up like nervous birds and my voice did the thing it does when it wants to be trusted. It lowered and slowed. Maintain present heading. Expect delay. You're doing great. Off frequency, I coughed into my sleeve, and every time I saw the word visibility in a meta report, I laughed like a mean god because visibility was a joke at home. The lake was a safe place to cough. We sealed the windows with painter's tape. We moved the mattress to the floor because heat has opinions. We slept like monks who discovered they were not monks. The emergency gave me a way to pretend this was noble. We checked on the elderly neighbor down the track, the one who swears all governments are actually hedgehogs in overcoats. We set buckets under the gutters. We packed a bag in case, which turned into 2 bags, which turned into a trunk that looked like we were married to our own bad planning. We stood on the deck and watched the sky do an impression of Mars. I texted Jonah updates like a dutiful wife with a geography problem. We're clear here. Don't worry. How's the cat? He wrote back photos of our living room like an alibi. He said, come home if it gets scary, and I wrote, it's scarier not to be useful, which is a sentence that needs a court, a translator, and perhaps a fire. At some point during all of that, Sal stopped giving me jokes and gave me a chair instead. I sat in it and the truth poured like a cut. I'm meeting Lucas, I said. I know, she said, because of course she knew. My lies were high-visibility vests pretending to be blackout curtains. I braced for lecture and got a story about the time she slept in her car for 3 nights outside her ex's house after telling her own girlfriend she was on nights, and how guilt makes you believe you inventing sin. Pick a pain, she said. Just don't wait long enough to become 2 bad stories. I promised I'd decide. I did not. The deciding decided me. It was a Tuesday, I wasn't supposed to see him. I went anyway because routine makes rebels out of cowards. On the way home, the police had closed the highway after a truck kissed a concrete barrier. I took the back roads and a kangaroo decided my bumper looked like a dare. It glanced off terrifyingly fine, while my car's front panel bent into a rictus. I sat on the shoulder and shook like I'd just vectored 6 planes to a single runway. My phone, faithful snitch, showed a missed call from Jonah. Another from Sal. One from a number labeled Marina, which broke my heart in a weird domestic way because the house had become a person in my pocket. I drove to Sal's. She opened the door with eyes that had prepared to say, pick. I said, I can't be a person with 2 flight plans anymore. I slept on her couch and missed the lake like you miss a lung. At dawn I went home and told Jonah with the kind of sentences you can only write if you turn off the part of your brain that wants to stage manage outcome. I've been seeing Lucas, I said. At a house by a lake. He inhaled and then did not exhale for a count that made me want to call an ambulance. Then he said, are you safe, which was the wrong question and somehow the kindest. There's a peculiar dignity to a man who asks for a map when you hand him a storm. He wanted to know how long, how often, whether he had been foolish or merely human. I told him the truth and apologized for how it sounded reasonable. He cried quietly into his hands and I cried loudly into a tea towel, and then he asked, do you want to stay? I said yes and meant, I want to see if the thing we built can be something other than a heaven I sneak off to. He asked, do you love him? And I said, I love how I am at the lake, and he nodded like a man cataloging the beasts in his yard. He didn't throw a single object. He asked me to call Lucas while he took a walk, not because he wanted to supervise but because he didn't want our house to become a place where I kept important phone calls for outside. I wrote to Lucas instead because my voice had used all its power overnight, controlling storms that obeyed better than hearts. I can't come again, I wrote. I have to get licensed to the weather I chose. He wrote, I don't want you to apologize for being honest, which made me want to throw my phone into the radiator to see if hissing could absolve. What happened after is as unphotogenic as real repair. Jonah and I went to a couples therapist who had soft chairs and a refusal to let metaphors do all the work. She asked me to explain approach plates to a non-pilot. I did, and then she asked me to diagram my heart's approach plate for home. I drew holds stacked like pancakes and a runway with lights that flicker. Jonah drew a weather station beside it, rudimentary and wrong, and we laughed for the first time in a way that wasn't gallows. She told us to plan 3 boring rituals and keep them like a religion. We did. Tuesday pasta, even if the sauce is a sulk. Saturday morning walk past the creek where the ibis pretend to be elegant. Sunday night, what's the smallest thing you're proud of on the couch with the crime show that softens us? I told Sal I'd told him. She brought over a cake she did not bake with the plastic lid still trying to pretend. She ate half while I ate loud regret. We moved my label maker, yes I am that person, into a drawer and only brought it out for cables. I texted Marina a thank you that did not include the word sorry because I am learning the difference. I sent keys back in an envelope with a stamp that had an echidna on it looking like the universal symbol for mind your business. Lucas wrote once more 3 weeks later, the radiator is quiet this year. I didn't reply. I went to the sink and counted lightning that wasn't there. Months have a way of forming stairs even if you were trying to live on a slope. I didn't forgive myself cleanly. I forgave myself in lint. In the grocery aisle where Jonah put coriander in the trolley and I didn't make a face. In the way I finally told him I hate the sound of his toothbrush charger at 2 a.m. and he moved it without using it to teach me a lesson. In the night I woke him because the loons were in my mouth and I needed his hand on my back like a weight. He didn't say, this is because you chose to be unruly with your map. He said, I'm here, the way a tower says it to a pilot who sounds small. At work, I speak slower now, which is not recommended on paper but has saved someone, I'm sure of it. Maintain 200 knots, I say like a lullaby. Expect vectors, I say like a promise. I hear the tremble in certain captains when the crosswind pushes their confidence sideways, and I want to tell them what I tell myself. You can do hard things if you admit it's hard. I can feel my colleagues listening to my cadence and borrowing it on days their voices go thin. I carry less smoke around. I smile at the meta when it says Kavak because whoever invented ceiling and visibility okay was a poet who knew pilots needed a too casual friend. Sometimes I still drive the highway and my car feels like it knows the exit it shouldn't take. I don't. I keep going to the big roundabout where the jacarandas drop purple like they are using the road for stationery, and I remember Lucas very specifically like a tool I shouldn't leave in the rain. I don't make him a villain because that absolves me. I don't make him a hero because that absolves the truth that my best self was lazy about training. I make him a man at a lake who taught me how thin ice sings and that cedar can look like forgiveness if you leave it in the sun. If you need a moral, I don't have a good one, but I have a true one. Tell the person with whom you share a kettle when you start writing weather reports for a different climate. I love the lake house because it let me be a woman who didn't need to narrate her usefulness. Now I am practicing being her where the spices have lids and the Wi-Fi is uninterested in poetry. It is not cinematic. It is Jonah reading to me from his latest paper because he insists the phrase heteroskedasticity is a ride. It is me confessing I skip one page of the crossword on purpose so he can feel brilliant. It is Tuesday pasta mid-boil, the radiator here making its own soft hiss while the city tries to become sky, and I go stand on the balcony to count seconds between flash and rumble, reminding myself, you can be loyal and still ache, you can ache and still choose, you can choose and choose again until the air you control includes the door to your own house. Sometimes in bed he'll ask me half asleep, where are your planes, and I whisper, holding, all holding, and the room goes very still like it understands the weight in the word maintain, And we do.